Robert Crane has many years in the, he's just grabbed the screen, but he's had many years in the Microsoft ecosystem, expert in things like SharePoint many years past, but right now, Robert's an MVP inside the Azure and 365 space. Welcome, Robert, and take it away.
Thanks, guys. So it's important to remember that in just the last week, the US president has signed an executive order mandating that cybersecurity become a priority for all elements within the US government. This has set a timeline, this has set a number of requirements for the US government to get up to speed and get up to a suitable level when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, I took a look at today's paper, Sydney Morning Herald for me, and again, I'll read you a line from the front page. Real estate listings portal Domain is warning users to be careful when trying to secure rental properties on its website after a cyber attack allowed an unauthorized third party to access personal information and demand deposits. So the idea here is that every single day, cybersecurity is becoming a more and more important part of every single business, whether they're technology or not. Now, the challenge with security is going to be that it's not only a technical requirement, it is also a people challenge. Now, when you boil it down to its simplest terms, it comes down to a diagram like this I've found that you can take to anybody to help them to understand what security is all about. So we have a triangle here, and the reality is you can choose any two sides, but you can't choose all three. So you can choose to be secure and cheap, it's not going to be usable. If you want usable and cheap, well, then it's surely not going to be secure. So let's look at multi-factor authentication. That is very secure, and again, it is very cheap because it's included in every single Office 365, Microsoft 365 plan. But implementing MFA does make things slightly less usable because we have to go through this additional challenge to get access to our data. So the first lesson here is that security is always a trade-off. You need to make, or the customer needs to make the decision about where that trade-off is going to occur. Now, what we're finding is we want to generally err in the direction of more rather than less security. Now, in today's cloud environment, many things are different from what they were back when there was a large focus on-prem. What that means is the concept is that the cloud is now far more secure than on-prem. That is because of a shared responsibility model where Microsoft is doing a lot of the heavy lifting down at the infrastructure level. That doesn't preclude additional steps being taken, but things like the cloud allow the aggregation of millions and trillions of signals that can be run through machine learning, artificial intelligence across many environments and then synthesized and provided back to us. So again, the world is different. But with that said, there are some basic tenets around security that will always be the same. The most common one that people hopefully are familiar with is defense in depth. So if we think back to when we had castles and forts, they were protected by moats and drawbridges and tall walls, and that worked very well. They're not, again, an absolute, but the idea was to make it difficult for an attacker to get to the valuables that are in the center of our defense in depth strategy. Now, I think everybody's probably familiar with all the stats you see about breaches and ransomware attacks and so on. But what I thought I'd do is just focus on some numbers from Microsoft around the challenges for people implementing security. So what we see is that security has a cost. There's no doubt that there is a cost to implement, manage, maintain, and find that needle in the haystack. Okay, 80% of our breaches out there are taken from incidents where passwords are captured from other third parties and users have typically reused them, or they're using bad passwords. Automation is a fantastic part of today's technology, but it can also be used for nefarious purposes. It can be set up to do brute force attacks, random password attempts. Now, if you don't believe me, go and have a look at Wikipedia, do a search for the 10,000 most common passwords, and you'll find a complete updated Wikipedia article on the 10,000 most common passwords, which again, anybody can take and reuse in an attempt to get into systems. One of the other interesting points is simply the number of products many suppliers are using. So think about how many security products you may be using. Each of those creates their own unique vulnerabilities in the fact of where's the information going, who's monitoring it, how's it being implemented, is it being fully implemented, patched, and updated. And I think the big takeaway here is to be asking yourself is, well, how serious are we about security? Everybody says they're serious about security. There's lots and lots of websites and lots of social media about it, but where is the reality here? So the idea here from a partner's point of view is to say this is a growing area and it will continue to grow, and SMBs are beginning to realize that this is a priority for their business, because typically a cyber intrusion or attack on their organization has a very high chance of putting them out of business. That's an extinction event. Okay, so we need to protect these organizations to make sure that they can continue on. One of the interesting trends now is that many SMBs are beginning to see the importance of security and beginning to question the providers of security services. They're going back to those people who have contractual arrangements or are indicating they are doing security for that organization and basically asking questions, verifying it, getting third party, getting auditors to come in and verify that settings are at a level they should be. And the reality is that SMBs simply don't have the skill set. There is so much to be across the environment and what's happening happening out there each and every day that requires a specialist, a trusted advisor to do that. So the idea here is you're looking at a growing market, a growing need, as well as a situation where the end user, the customer, the consumer, basically doesn't have the expertise, they don't have enough time or resources, they are not familiar with some of these environments, and in summary, they're basically overwhelmed by what needs to be done. Because as we know in security, it only takes one vulnerability, one option to get through and potentially exploit the environment. Now, as I mentioned, one of the big changes in today's world is simply the fact that the device is the firewall. The device is the endpoint, which means that we have devices that people use every day. We have devices that users are using across multiple operating systems, no longer just Microsoft. So we've got iOS, we've got Android, we've got Linux out there. We need to protect these wherever they are. Now, in a world where people have gone and work remotely, we've also got the situation where these devices could be in many, many different locations on good and poor quality internets. We could have people using machines that their kids use at the same time to play games on and so on. So this is one of the biggest challenges. How do we manage, maintain, and secure all of these remote devices, which are only going to grow? Now, the good news from the Microsoft perspective is that many people don't appreciate that Microsoft is an enormous security business. At this stage, they reported over $10 billion in the last year, and that is a 40% year-on-year growth. So many people mistake the fact that Microsoft is purely about emails, purely about productivity, purely about Office desktop software or operating systems. The reality is it's fast becoming probably the biggest security company on the planet, because it has a range of solutions that can protect a variety of environments, because it has a variety of customers. Now, when you look at that range, you see that Microsoft is probably the only company that can provide protection from a desktop, from an endpoint, all the way through to a cloud service. So some of the examples here are things like BitLocker, mobile device management. We have data loss prevention. We have cloud app security. We have all of these options that are available that can be configuring and need to be configured appropriately to provide the full range of protection. Now, one of the oversights I see a lot of people make is the fact that they don't enable many of the out-of-the-box or the provided security features with the products they've purchased. So people that are running Windows 10 have a vast array of security options available to them, even in a standalone mode. Office 365, Microsoft 365, again, is a huge example of many, many options that can be and should be enabled. Now, if you look across the attack chain here, you'll see that a number of Microsoft information or Microsoft products and services are going to give you the coverage, right? And this is not all encompassing. There is just so many products, but I think these are the main ones that I'd be calling out. So we start with Defender for Office 365. This is an additional mail hygiene scanning capability to protect against attachments and malicious links. We've then got Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So this is the agent that will provide traditional AV, will provide endpoint protection, but also link to a cloud service to allow reporting, management, EDR, and all of that. We've got identity protection to look at the sequences and the intelligence around when users log in. Are they logging in from the same IP address? Is it an IP associated with the dark web? How many times are they doing this a day, across which devices, and report that back? We've also got something called Azure Sentinel. So an important thing here to remember is that we're talking about security in the Microsoft cloud. This is not just a Windows 10 idea. This is basically a combination, an integration of the Microsoft stack, Windows 10, Microsoft 365, Azure. All of these provide capabilities to assist in this defense in depth approach to security. All of these require configuration, setup, management, and control by a skilled party. Now, not only do we have Sentinel, we have Cloud App Security, and we also have Microsoft Defender for Identity for people that still have an on-prem environment. Now, the big benefit Microsoft provides where few others can compete is simply the amount of signals that it's receiving from these environments that it can then take into what's known as the security graph. It can then apply machine learning and artificial intelligence and look at those and provide signals and data back to people. So you can know about breaches that have occurred elsewhere before they happen or before you may see them in your environment, thanks to this concept of signals intelligence. Now, the idea is this signals intelligence comes from things like Teams meetings that we're on, from your identifying yourself when you logged into your environment. And at the end of the day, there's so much data. We're seeing here billions and potentially trillions of signals, events, information that is occurring that is virtually impossible for small organizations to take advantage of or to leverage. However, the advantage with partnering with Microsoft is going to be you're going to get access to these enterprise-grade tools with these billions and billions of signals that you can then apply to an environment of any size. This is the huge advantage that Microsoft will provide anybody who is utilizing their environments. Now, we've talked about some generalities here, so let's get into some specifics, hopefully give you some takeaways that you can use to apply to your environments today. The thing you need to think about primarily is identity is the most important thing. The way the user logs in, they log into their phone with an identity. They log into their desktop with an identity. They log into their Outlook web access with an identity. It's all about identity. It's not about firewalls. It's not about domain controllers. It's all about securing the identity first and foremost. And the good thing about this is we have tools like Azure AD and some of the additional add-ons that we get with Azure AD P1 to provide and integrate with this. Now, the other thing that Microsoft is moving towards and encouraging everybody to move towards is zero trust architecture. That means you can't make an assumption that because something is behind a firewall or because user X logs on that it is secure. You have to assume that every single device needs to secure any communications it has with any other device at every single stage. So you need to be thinking about how do we constantly make sure that every piece of our architecture and environment is secure and reduces the environment for attackers to get in. So zero trust is one of the major aims that we need to get to. And this, interestingly, was something that was called out in that executive order written by the President of the US in the last week. He's called out the fact that they need to move to a zero trust architecture. Now, if you stop and think about it, if it's being mandated at a government level, eventually it's going to probably become mandatory down at the commercial level as well. So being on the front foot, getting started early with this sort of mentality and approach is going to save you time in the long run. Now, the three simple options I suggest that you consider when you're starting any security is going to be using Secure Score, using multi-factor, and also setting up conditional access policies. So let's drill into those quickly. So if you want to have a look at the Secure Score of any single tenant in Microsoft, you go to securescore.office.com. You'll need to log in as a global administrator. To do that, it will give your tenant and all the security in your environment from the Microsoft aspect a rating out of 100. So you can see that this tenant, demo tenant, is only rated at 13 or 14%, right? That's very, very poor. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that I would suggest to you that anything below a rating of 30 is you are vulnerable. You need to really step up your game and get that to a much higher level. Anything below 50, it's a little bit better, but not much. I think really the baseline you should be aiming at as a minimum is 65. So every partner, I believe, should be aiming at a minimum score for themselves and their customers of at least 65. However, that's not really good enough. I would suggest good partners are moving their secure score further north and getting towards or above that 80% mark. So if you want, number one takeaway is go back, have a look at your own secure score in your own environment, and if it's not at 80%, then start working to get it to 80%. Now, the other thing that you can do in Secure Score, if you go up to the include option in the top right, you can pull down a menu and you'll see that you have an option called Achievable Score. This will give you an idea of basically the capabilities, the licensing that you are paying for already that you haven't implemented fully. So it's an indication of where you should be based on the licenses that you have. This is a really, really good discussion to go and have with customers. You can look at their secure score or prospects. You can go to their secure score, pull this down and say, look, you are paying for these licenses and you aren't using all these capabilities. Let us show you how to get full usage of all the licensing that you are paying for. Now, if we have a look back to the RSA conference where we've got some stats from Microsoft, 1.2 million compromised accounts occurred in January 2020. But if we analyze that, what you find is 99.9% of those compromised accounts did not have MFA. So let that sink in. MFA is the number one way that you can almost eliminate the chance of compromise. Now, you might say, yes, that's great. That seems obvious to me, but let's have a look at some more statistics. So according to CoreView, the majority of admins of accounts have not enabled multi-factor on their own admin accounts. And here's the really scary stat. 97% of Microsoft 365 users are not using MFA. 97%. So you can look at that and you can say, you know what? I see that as an opportunity for me to make sure that I'm focused on security and go and talk to these businesses about the value of MFA. And here's my market share. My opportunity share in the market is 97% of people have the capability to enable MFA, and there is no cost to do that. Why have they not done that? And the other one we see is that in organizations with techs, they are providing too many controls, too much ability to do that. How can you get access to the right information? Because if you have an insider threat or a rogue employee, how can we make sure they don't damage the organization? Now, quickly on MFA, yes, MFA, most people implement IC as a rolling set of numbers we're all familiar with. But again, Microsoft provides the capability to use Windows Hello for Business. So all I have to do for me in the morning is sit down in front of my Surface machine, it recognizes me, logs me in, That's the first factor. Then the machine has a second factor with TPM and talks to Azure AD, and I'm logged in securely without even having to know a password or put in a PIN. How convenient for that is a customer? I would suggest that's even more convenient for them than probably the way they're logging in today. Now, we've also got a multi-factor app, and that app can be used for the rolling numbers as we traditionally do. But remember that we've also got the ability to push the notifications that we can choose a number that matches the number on the screen to be logged in. So again, we don't need the password. We can use an authentication method on our devices to verify that in a secure manner. Now, again, in environments where the Authenticator app isn't used or permitted or not preferred, you can also use FIDO2 keys. So these are things like YubiKeys that can be used as your second factor. Microsoft supports all of these, and this is, I think, one of the differentiation points that you see between partners who are progressive. They are the ones implementing passwordless login versus the traditional methods. Now, as mentioned, apart from MFA, the other thing that I would call out is Azure AD conditional access. So conditional access basically looks at a successful login. So once the users put their details in, their login is evaluated against a number of policies. You know, which device are they logging in, which location are they from, which apps do they want to log in, and this is all policy controlled. And then it makes decisions. Will it allow the user to access? Will it limit their access? Will it require them to do MFA? And so on. Now, the good news here is that conditional access is going to require policy. Policy is going to be something that a skilled technician needs to enable and needs to set up. Now, again, one of the big benefits of the Microsoft environment is going to be, this is going to be a consistent interface environment every single time for every single customer who has implemented conditional access. Now, even better than that, you can implement this with automation using things like PowerShell, because Microsoft allows that capability to quickly and easily create scripts that will take your best practices and allow you to apply it to tenant after tenant after tenant. Now, what you see is that if you try to use conditional access and you are prevented, you will see a message like this. So yes, you have put in the right credentials, but no, you can't have access. Now, what was really exciting is that Microsoft announced this today. So now conditional access can be added upon a GPS location. So not only can we restrict by IP, not only can we restrict by country, but now we can actually restrict by GPS location. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that, learn what that is, and start implementing, because that's a great way to begin to, again, lock down and control users. Now, one of the other things that I see people don't appreciating is that Microsoft is a leader in many, many security aspects on its own. So, for example, here you'll see that it is a leader in the email space. Now, the reason is that when an email comes into your Microsoft 365 environment, it's basically going through all of these layers. We've got edge protection, sender intelligence, content filtering, and we've got protection at the Office clients, in SharePoint, OneDrive. All of this is available to you. All of this you should be turning on. You should be ramping up to the max and setting to best practices. Microsoft will also give you the capability to analyze the mail flow. So here you can see of 5,000 inbound messages, the edge filtering's knocked off over 2,000 of those for me. So you can go in and drill in and see the effect of these policies and demonstrate this to a customer to show the value that these technologies correctly configured are providing. Now, if you haven't looked at the Exchange environment recently, you'll find that they also have a configuration analyzer, much like Secure Score. So now you can analyze the Exchange Online policy and filtering environment, and you'll see that Microsoft even provides you the capability to click a single button and adopt best practices if you want. So again, it's really easy to start doing this and securing your environment to best practices, and that will continue to improve. One of the other things I would encourage you to make sure of is that your audit logging is enabled. Many tenants do not have audit logging enabled, so go into the URL provided there and make sure that your audit logging is enabled so you're capturing all the events if you need to, again, go in and do that. Also, if you want to get the alert so you know what's going on, again, have a look at that URL. You can set up custom alerts to tell you things like suspicious emails, downloaded malware, and so on. Now, Microsoft is moving a large component of its security tools into a single portal at security.microsoft.com. So if you pop in there, have a look, you'll see the aggregation of many of these tools, which again had individual portals over time. Now, one of the tools I'd like to call out quickly is Microsoft Cloud App Security. This is basically a tool that allows you to look across various areas for things like unusual downloads, suspicious IPs, impossible travel, impersonations, and so on. So if, again, you haven't looked at Cloud App Security as a logging and alerting mechanism, I think you should. And again, I will call out that once again, Gartner has called out Microsoft as a leader in the endpoint protection. So what this means is the actual agent you put on your endpoint, the power of that. Most people typically deride Windows Defender, but it is proven to be one of the best endpoint protections provided. Now, when you couple that with the protections the cloud provides, again, it's pretty much bulletproof. So if you haven't looked again at the Defender for Endpoint, I again encourage you to do that. Have a look at the capabilities. The other one, the final one I'd like to call out here is Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel, again, is an Azure service, and what it does is allows you to aggregate your logs from many, many sources, from Exchange, from SharePoint, pull that into a single portal that you can view any incidents, act on them, and take actions and report. And the great thing is when you combine Sentinel with Azure Lighthouse, you can get multi-tenant capabilities in a single pane of glass with basically virtually no cost to do that. Now, we've only got a short amount of time. I am winding up, but I haven't even had time to talk about things like Device Guard, Exploit Guard, Application Guard, Credential Guard, and so on. There are just so many options here that Microsoft make available, typically for free or included in the license, that I don't see people turning on and enabling. So don't look at buying third-party products from other vendors. Look at, have I utilized everything Microsoft's already providing me as part of my license or for free? So in summary, the takeaways I have for you are that Microsoft is a leader. There's no question in security. It's a $10 billion a year business growing 40% year on year on, and that's only going to continue. Okay, and remember that you need to implement what Microsoft's providing inside 365 and inside Windows. Look at your secure score. So there's an identity score, there's secure score, there's the Exchange scoring as well. Look at all those places as a great place to kick things off. Don't just think of Microsoft 365, as I mentioned. Think about Azure. What else can Azure do to help you with security? Integration is the key here. Microsoft's going to win on its integration. All of these things natively integrate to make your life easier, and also that means automation. And I cannot stress enough, if you do anything after today's session, please go and turn on MFA absolutely everywhere for every single customer. And don't be afraid to use machine intelligence and AI to make your life easier and leverage the power that Microsoft provides across its total environment down to even a single user. So I've provided some resources there for you. I'm sure we'll make sure the slides get out to each and every one of you after the fact, so take advantage of those. I will put my details up there. Please feel free to contact me on the emails if you have any questions or clarifications. My Twitter is also there. And I think with that, Guy, it's probably time to hand back to you. I think, Guy, you need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Robert. I switched cameras. I now need to mute over here. Give me 1 second.
May I ask that he go back to the slide with the shortcuts so we could just take a quick snapshot?
Okay. So now that I've muted myself there, Robert, as you were saying, we do have a very limited amount of time today, and it's a quagmire of a topic because, you know, I guess every nook and cranny is an opportunity for someone to compromise an environment. And similar to your triangle around security, I think there's a continuum, and that is between access and convenience. where you have access, there's risk, you have convenience, you're running a risk. Now, everyone, we're running this through as 2 hours. If you want to take a break, we are going to do a Q&A at the end. I'll take 5 minutes now. Philip at Myers on, and so Philip, thanks for joining us. Philip's, I guess, a steward of Microsoft in Australia, 30 years plus with Microsoft. And he asked one question, Robert, of you, and that was, how does Microsoft educate its partners that it really is a security company? What do you think is the steps for us as a community to discover and learn about the security potential or opportunity that's there?
I think the biggest challenge is that Microsoft offers a lot of entry vectors into its security environment. So you can learn, you'll see posts out there of how to become a Defender for 365 Ninja, how to become a Sentinel Ninja. They've got all these siloed, to an extent, capabilities. My advice is exactly what I said in that. Start with Secure Score. Secure Score will tell you what your rating is, as well as a list of improvements and suggestions and step-by-step for you to get your Secure Score up. Start with what it's telling you you need to do, follow through the links, improve that knowledge, and grow it out from there. Yes, there's lots of bright, shiny objects and security out there, but good security starts with the basics and moves through a process, moves through a checklist, making sure that it covers all the holes and doesn't leave anything behind. So my advice, as always, is to start with Secure Score and grow from there.